Hi, I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining me for another episode of From the Corner Office. What is the state of Black America? Each year, the National Urban League seeks to answer this question with its annual report that fully examines racial equality across economics, employment, and education, among other areas. It has been released at a time like no other for African Americans reeling from the devastating effects of the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and systemic racism. No one is better suited to discuss how African Americans can meet these daunting challenges than my guest, National Urban League President and CEO, Marc Morial. For 17 years, his energetic, skilled leadership has redefined civil rights in the 21st century. At the same time, he has expanded the organization's empowerment agenda, emphasizing economic advancement, education reform, income equality, and urban poverty. In fact, Marc has led its 100 million 5 years job rebuilding America initiative, creating access to opportunity in 50 cities throughout the affiliate network. This New Orleans native hails from a family devoted to public service and fighting injustice. As such, he eventually followed in the footsteps of his father, the late Ernest Dutch Morial, who made history and sweeping change as the Crescent City's first Black mayor. His milestone, becoming the city's youngest mayor and leading the New Orleans Renaissance, responsible for a 60% drop in crime, cleaning up police corruption, and revitalizing a stagnant economy during 2 terms from 1994 to 2002. Today, Marc will discuss the progression of African Americans during a period of uncertainty and with a consequential presidential election less than 3 months away. Moreover, he will share NUL's bold agenda, which includes the development of its historic Harlem-based Empowerment Center. Marc, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Butch, thank you very much. And thank you for your leadership and the powerful legacy of Black Enterprise as you continue to hold that torch very high. The Urban League movement is proud of you and your continuing work.
Appreciate that. Marc, we are in clearly unprecedented times. And, every year I look forward to the release of the State of Black America, but never has it been more important than what is happening now. One of the things, it's an annual report you guys release. One of the things that's interesting is that this report has been released since 1976. And sometimes folks do not realize, it's been on for 44 years. But this year in particular, given all the other pandemics that we briefly talked about, and we'll talk about some more, it's especially relevant. So I'd love for you, if you would share with everyone a little bit about the State of Black America, the report that you come out with, and what specifically is the Equality Index, because I think that's really, really important overall.
So Butch, thanks so much for the question and for the opportunity. First, a little bit of history. The State of Black America was a vision of Vernon Jordan in 1976 when he watched President Ford's 1976 State of the Union address. And during that time, Black America was experiencing a recession. There was stagflation in the economy. Black Americans were witnessing an assault on the gains of the 1960s in the Nixon and Ford administrations. And President Ford did not mention civil rights, Black people, urban America, poverty, or any of the pain or any of the hopes that Black people faced in his State of the Union address. So Vernon Jordan said, it's our responsibility for us to report independently on the State of Black America, and thus the report was born in May or June of 1976. Today, let me just talk about the State of Black America in 2020. We are facing a crisis of untold proportions. Certainly, it's clearly the greatest crisis that we faced in the 21st century, and may be the greatest crisis we faced in some 40 years. Why do I say that? Because we've got 3 crises in one. We've got the crisis of COVID, which has laid bare the disparities in the health systems of America, where we have some 150,000 deaths, 40% of them are of Black people. It's laid bare the economic disparities, where now we have unemployment levels reaching Great Depression levels and exceeding the Black unemployment rate during the recession of 2007 to 2012. And then we have the racial justice crisis, where the death of George Floyd basically pulled the covers off of this pandemic of police misconduct and mass incarceration and the brokenness of America's criminal justice system. That's 2020. And then fourthly, we face a national presidential administration which has refused to enforce civil rights laws, which does not have a diverse cabinet, which has not appointed diverse judges, and which has just had the rhetoric of antagonism and hate all too often in a fashion that we've not seen in our life coming from the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. This is the state of affairs as we see it today in August of 2020. So the State of Black America reports on that, and reports on it with both commentary and also with data. You asked about the Equality Index. Yeah. When we designed it 15 years ago, we sought to, if you will, create a way to evaluate the conditions of Black people to white people according to a range of social and economic indicators. And with respect to those indicators, the way the index works is that white Americans are seen as the number one, and then Black American status is a percentage of that number, unless Black American status exceeds that of whites in a particular area. So all in all, where does that place us? At about 72 or 73% of the social and economic status of white Americans. Hispanics are at about 78%. But what's, I think, more important is that these numbers have not significantly changed since we began the Equality Index in 2004. In many respects, these disparities are in suspended animation. In many respects, Black Americans are like the caboose on the train. If the train speeds up, our conditions may get better, but our relative condition stays the same. So the Equality Index is designed to give people the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth when it comes to the economic and social status of Black America. And, you know, Butch, what I am always, I look forward with great anticipation each year, and have for many, many years, of the important research that Black Enterprise does. Whether it's the rankings of African-American businesses, I can tell my staff, this is part of your Bible, your work Bible. You need to know this information. Whether it's the incredible work you've done when it comes to Black corporate directors, all of this research that we do and you do is designed to help people understand what the truth is with respect to the conditions that our community faces in this time.
You know, Mark, we have been, and I appreciate the partnership that we've had with the Urban League over the years. And clearly what we have focused on are two areas in particular. We focused on, well, really three areas. We focused on corporate America and turning a mirror on corporate America to see where are African Americans in that network, right, in terms of their growth and development within corporate America and their jobs and their promotions, what have you. The second area we look at is corporate boards, which you referred to. And the third area we look at, and I know you guys focus on it as well, is wealth, right? Because, and it's a wealth index, and it's really measuring what is the average wealth of an African-American person,
yes,
versus the average wealth of a white person. And so while we certainly have made gains through organizations like the Urban League, in voting, in in housing, in some other areas. The one area which there's no question about it where we've made little to no gain, in fact, have gone backwards.
Yes.
Is in wealth. Well, and when we say wealth, we're talking about assets minus liabilities. What does the average wealth of a Black family or Black household look like? And within your report, one of the things that it was startling to me was the fact that the Black wealth has actually gone backwards over a 20-year period, not forwards. Because if you think about it, what's happened in the last 20 years, you've seen a stock market that is growing by leaps and bounds. You see wealth of individuals, the income inequality gap has grown. And so what has that meant? If you are a person who did not own a home, which is where the greatest disparity of wealth exists, if you did not own a home and you were not invested in the stock market, but even if you were doing the same exact thing, you were losing ground to your white counterpart who may have owned their home or may have been invested in the market. So if you would you speak a little bit to?
Yeah, I think you really, I think sort of articulated it and stated it well. Essentially, we have lost ground. Since the year 2000 to 2020, we have lost ground when it comes to wealth. And the primary driver of it has been the loss of Black home ownership, where the numbers have gone from, we were bumping up to about 50% Black home ownership around 2005. Today, we're down closer to 40%. We're almost back to where we were in the middle 1970s. And for many Black people, their wealth was tied to home ownership and the equity in their own homes. That has occurred. That has been a backward slide. And I fear that this COVID pandemic and the economic downturn associated with it, the Trump depression, if you will, is going to cause that Black home ownership rate to decline even further. And that's a pain point for our community, but it speaks to what we need to do. The second thing, and it's important to understand, income inequality, which is the broader term, racial income inequality, which is more specific to our community. What it means is that average Black family who is renting, their earnings are not significantly increasing. Therefore, their ability to save, to be able to own, their ability to qualify under a debt to income ratio analysis makes it far more difficult for them to become homeowners in 2020 than perhaps in the year 2000. And so it's a double-edged sword. Many in our community lost their homes due to the economic recession of 2007 to 2011. But same people and others now have a difficult time qualifying to buy a new home. It's so severe that many people in the United States, and disproportionately Black people in the United States, are paying as much as 50% or even more of their take-home pay for rent. So the cost of housing has increased. Incomes and earnings have been relatively flat. So you've got an increasing situation for all but maybe the top 15 or 20% in the American economy. And we need a broad home ownership strategy as a nation, and we need a Black home ownership strategy in this country to rebuild this wealth. And there are ways and things and means and methods that can be utilized to try to address this.
Yeah, we started back in 2000 the Black Wealth Initiative, And we started by looking at home ownership and saying, we're going to focus on having African Americans own their own home. And so the disparity in wealth in this country is the fact that 76% of white folks own their own home. And depending upon what year you're looking at, is somewhere between 40 to 45% of African Americans own their own home. So that 30% gap makes up for a huge difference, because what's happened also in that same time frame is, if you owned a home, imagine if you owned a home back in 2000, the value of that home over the last 20 years has gone up, depending upon where you live, exponentially, without having nothing to do necessarily with what you put into the home or what have you, just the value of the home. And ironically today, interest rates have never been lower than they ever have been. That you can get a home mortgage interest for less than 3%. So it would seem that this would
be a great time.
This would be the ideal time,
yeah.
The absolute ideal time for us to have a program. And we'll talk about it offline afterwards. But we want to work with you on it, because quite honestly, that's got to be the lead. You got to start with that. Yeah. Wealth is not, do I have a BMW that I've leased in my driveway, right? Wealth is assets minus liabilities. We need to have African Americans saving, investing, and owning a home. I was having this conversation, I'll personalize it, with my daughter literally this morning. And she was talking to me, and she lives in Oakland, out in California. And, it's very expensive. She works for Google out in San Francisco. And she's sitting there telling me, well, I don't think that we can afford, because she's engaged, about to get married. I don't know that we can afford to buy a home. I said, sweetheart, if you can't afford to buy a home, no one can afford to buy a home. Yes, you can. It's only a question of where you put the priority. But people,
right,
this includes us, we've got to teach our kids and our grandkids and young people, those same exact things. It's things that I used to look at my father and say, why does this man always want to have conversations with me at dinner or at whatever time about business and about investing and other things? And I was like, we can't have any what I would call, quote, what I was calling normal conversations. But thank God he didn't, because he had me focus on what was most important. And I think that's something that we need to bring into the schools. We need to be able to, and the people use the word, which sometimes people don't like, which is literacy, financial literacy. And it makes people feel bad, using the word literacy.
Yeah, right.
This should be a different word. Let's not call it literacy. Let's call it financial empowerment, or whatever is necessary.
Financial empowerment, financial awareness. I mean, any of the above. I like that, to change the terminology, because, we have to be more willing to talk about, finances and money, and speak about it with our closest family members, friends, and allies. And you mentioned in daughters, my older daughter bought her first home about 6 or 7 years ago. And I insisted that she go to a home buyer education course before she bought. And she said, Daddy, I have this degree and I have this other degree. You act as though I don't know anything. And, and what are you saying about yourself? I said, look, I want you to go. So finally she goes. She comes back and says, I was about to get ripped off. She says, now I understand why you wanted me to do this. I understand neighborhoods are different, interest rates are different, down payments are different, maintenance charges are different. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes in. So, today she owns 2 properties, right? Through her own ingenuity. But, you're absolutely right that maybe we need a new term, financial awareness, financial empowerment, to help people understand just some basics, because people are making financial decisions all the time. I've pushed back and am supporting some legislation that allows cash that requires businesses to accept cash or a debit card or a credit card. And I was talking to someone and I said, every time you put that debit card down, I said, the debit card company is charging you maybe, or they're charging the vendor, the business. I said, now if they're charging the business, you think they might have sneak it and pass it on to you some sort of way? Well, I didn't know that. How can that happen? I said, well, you have to know, the debit card's fine, the credit card is fine, but for some people, they want to use cash. And if they want to use cash, they should be allowed to use cash, not mandated that they use a particular type of payment method. But it's all about awareness. It's all about empowerment. And I'd love to work with you all. One of the things we do at the National Urban League, we do home buyer education. It's called housing counseling. We do about 30,000 cases a year. And about 2,000 to 3,000 actually lead to someone buying a home. We think it's good that some people go through the home buyer education class and say, I'm not ready to buy. I'm not prepared to buy. I need to shore up my credit. I need to shore up my debt to income ratio. I need to find something I can truly afford and not fall in love with a house and then stretch and then be at risk. So all of these things are so crucial, to our community and to learning and understanding in our community. But, Black Enterprise has been this just great Bible. I mean, I carried it around, look at it all the time. I try to memorize the top 10 businesses. So when I'm speaking around the country, I'm conversing on that. And it's a great, I think the data, and your mission and our mission is very closely aligned. I work with business owners. The way you elevate wealth and education is so crucial. So, I'm looking forward to deepening our partnership, to finding, new ways that we can work together.
Right. Let me switch topics a moment and talk about health disparity. And it's one of the things also in your report on the state of Black America, and it's heightened by what we see happening with COVID-19. Talk a little bit about the explicit and the implicit bias that goes into health and how it has impacted African Americans.
Black people are less likely to have health insurance. Many working people, they may make too much money from Medicaid, not old enough for Medicare, and if there's no employer-provided insurance, they're in sort of this insurance hole. So the uninsured rate is higher. Obviously, when the uninsured rate is higher, your ability to access doctors and testing and therapies is just much more limited. And we've got to move in this country to some sort of system where healthcare is universally available. You can debate the method and the means, but where everyone happens to have coverage. And so Black people are less likely. Secondly, Black people are less likely to be in proximity to a physician, to a doctor, to a hospital where we live, particularly if we live in the rural South, or if we live in many, many urban communities across the nation. The accessibility of a doctor. And then secondly, it is not uncommon, and it's well documented, that even when Black people have a doctor, some doctors are inequitable in the services they provide, in how they treat a Black patient versus a white patient. And all of these, spell health disparities. And then the next thing is social and economic conditions. You take a long bus, a train ride to get to work. You have a job that is physically demanding all the time. You have the stress of life, being Black in America, in urban communities. All of that also contributes to one's health conditions. And when you double that with lack of access, it speaks to the social conditions and the health access issues, why we have health disparities in America, which means we have Black people who have more likely to have diabetes, cardiovascular disease, asthma, for example. with COVID, the research, we just looked at some research because in the state of Black America this year, Johns Hopkins is our research partner. And one of the things, I missed this earlier, but it makes sense, is that a Black person would get to a doctor later in the course of their illness than the average white person. The Black person might not immediately go to the doctor, might be concerned about missing work, might not have easy access to a doctor, may have difficulty finding or getting an appointment. And therefore, by the time they go to the doctor, the disease is more severe. By the time they get to the hospital, the disease is more severe. That's part of the health disparities of COVID that people may have missed, which may speak to why the death rates are higher. The idea is if the interventions, medical interventions were earlier, you might have different outcomes. And so the health side of it, you know, and I have to tell you, and this has been on my mind because I did an interview yesterday with a gentleman, a Black doctor actually, who's writing a book on Flint Goodrich Hospital. Flint Goodrich Hospital was the Black hospital in New Orleans. I happened to be born there, or my brothers and sisters happened to be born there. My grandfather, who was a physician, was the chief of staff at that hospital for many, many years. The Black hospital, right? So it was during, but what you had at the Black hospital was tender loving care. What you had at the Black hospital was compassionate care for people in the Black community. So if you grew up in New Orleans in those times before the late 1960s, you were either going to be born at Flint Goodrich Hospital, the Black hospital, or you were going to be born in the so-called colored ward of the public hospital in New Orleans, because none of the private hospitals accepted African-American patients in those days, not even for birth of children, not even for emergency visits. So it got me to thinking. I felt maybe when it came to health access, I may have been a little spoiled because of the environment where my grandfather was a physician and my uncle was a physician. And, you know, I had this view of doctors being all nice and helpful and courteous and kind. And you could just go to the office and sit in the waiting room and they'd see you in the order in which you arrived, right? You did, that's what my grandfather practiced. You didn't need an appointment, you just showed up. And that to me, it's been a revelation as I got older that this system is really, really a system, right, that needs substantial change. And what I hope in this moment is that when we go back, when Congress goes back and they're appropriating millions and billions of dollars to rebuild public health systems in America, that equity and responsiveness to disparities are going to be part of the plan, not put Humpty Dumpty back together the same way he was again.
Right. You know, the one of the things that's come out of this, the pandemic of COVID-19, and speaking with many of my white friends, and they start talking about it, and they say, "But you don't seem overly, concerned." And I said, "Well, it's not that I'm not overly concerned. It's just that COVID-19 for you has become an inconvenience, whereas African Americans, Black people, are in a pandemic of racism all year long.
Yeah,
This
right.
is just another bump in the middle of some other things that we have to deal with." And I think it was heightened, and would love to get your point of view on that, your introspective point of view on what happened when we already had COVID-19 and the pandemic of this. And then a few months ago, somebody decided to put a knee on the neck of an African-American gentleman, George Floyd, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Now, what was not new was the knee on the neck, because we Black people have been getting harassed and and beaten up and shot and what have you by law enforcement for a long period of time. That's not all law enforcement. I'm not saying just suggesting that all law enforcement bad, but it has been a problem for a long period of time. But it was a point in time now suddenly that through social media and that there was an awakening. They're like, oh my God, this actually is taking place. Like, this is not something that was just made up. And it came in at a time in the middle of the pandemic of COVID-19, which caused social unrest and all the above. Now, as a former mayor, I know you have an interesting insight on this and saying, wow, so now not only do I have to deal with the pandemic of COVID-19 and how that's ravaging through for my citizens, I also have to deal with the pandemic of racism, which has existed. It just was brought to light now.
Yeah.
And what has come along with it, because now the narrative which is being pushed by the far right is that somehow or another, the people who are been fighting social injustice, many of whom have been our white brothers and sisters who long joined with us, somehow or another have this radical, and they're looting, and there's all of these negative things that are taking place. So would love to get your point of view, both as
it's a fascinating question, but I tell you what, think when George Floyd was murdered, people got to see something. Well, first of all, they were at home a lot, and therefore people were paying much more attention to the news. And all of a sudden, this video, and it was not edited, it was not varnished, it was not 10 seconds, and then you wonder what happened before, and you wonder, there the whole thing is. And when I saw it, I jumped out of my seat. I walked within a foot of the TV, and I started saying, let him up. Let him up. I mean, it was an instinctive response. Right. And then when you looked at the other videos, the people on the sidewalk were pleading for his life. To me, the most stunning thing was that these officers were taking this man's life while citizens, one was taping and the other guy says, get your knee off his neck. He's dying. You go back and look at all the body cam video and all of the video that the young lady took. It's a stunning thing. So people were at home and they were already on edge. Ahmaud Arbery had been killed, and we saw that video. Breonna Taylor had been killed, and all of a sudden, people erupted. It was a spontaneous uprising of outrage around the death of this man that you could not have predicted. And I don't think you could have orchestrated. I think it was a natural effect. Now, when it starts, people join in, they raise awareness on social media, they organize other protests. But that is what you had. You had people already on edge. Now, I think when I looked at the problems of the Minneapolis Police Department, Butch, I saw a department that's been broken a very long time. Yeah. A department with a long history of citizen complaints, a department with a low crime closure rate, a department with reputational issues in the community. I've said to every mayor, I speak, from time to time at the United States Conference of Mayors. I was president of that organization. I speak to the young mayors. I said, look, first thing you need to do is do an evaluation of your own police department. Don't buy what a police chief is telling you. Don't buy what XYZ is telling you. Do an independent evaluation, because you don't know where the sleeping alligator is. You don't know where the sleeping cobra is. You don't know, because the way these institutions love to protect their own prerogative. Do an evaluation. Find out if there are deep-seated problems. Address them now before you're forced by difficult circumstances, a community crisis, to be able to address them. And now, given where we are, that should be job number one for every mayor of every major American city, city council members, to do an evaluation and find out what is the use of force policy? What is the system of discipline? What are our hiring practices like? How effective are we? Are we simply running around arresting people for minor offenses, or are we dealing with gun violence? Are we dealing with sex trafficking? Are we dealing with a domestic assault? Are we dealing with serious issues? Are we running around? In the case of George Floyd, 5 officers or more swarming around a guy because he, quote unquote, had a allegedly bogus $20 bill? Please help me. That's what you all spend your time doing. 6 of you guys. Boy, that's tough policing, man. I mean, it outraged me because to me, it was a waste of resources. A waste of resources, right? And it all the staging as though George Floyd were a murderer or a rapist. You take him to the ground, you put handcuffs on him. None of that was necessary. It was not necessary. Then you find out over the last few days that Derek Chauvin, I think that's his name, the officer who had his knee on the neck, has now been indicted for tax evasion, for failing to pay taxes on over $400,000 that he earned moonlighting at a club, and he owns a vacation home someplace down in Florida. So that's evidence of a corrupt situation. For him, staying on the Minneapolis Police Department was not about being a Minneapolis police officer. It's about the extra money he could make, moonlighting at a club, and then he doesn't pay. So, you know, I think that when I look at this, and when I became mayor of New Orleans, I literally took the New Orleans Police Department completely apart and rebuilt it. Now, there's a lot of public momentum, and I stoked public support. I beat the drum to build the public support, to really, really redo, remake, and take the department apart. And it meant that some 70 officers were fired. It meant we had, new systems in place, which we put in place over a period of several years. I had a great police leader, the late Richard Pennington, who was my partner in the effort. But we had the will, and I instinctively felt that, if I didn't fix the department, I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't do the economic development things we wanted to do. I couldn't do the housing work that we did. I couldn't attract things like Essence. We couldn't do it unless we fundamentally straightened out. It was a department we had violence, we had corruption, we had brutality. We had all 3.
That's a great insight, Mark, from a person who was a mayor, and it's important that people understand that when they're looking at, because they're getting a glimpse of what is taking place. And I have a number of friends who are African-American law enforcement, including police chiefs. And their job has not been made easier.
No,
Shape or form over these last. I mean, it's gotten more and more difficult. But I think it's also being fed by what I want to pivot to next, which is it's being fed by politics.
Yep.
And in less than 3 months, we have arguably what could be the most important election of our lifetime, right? And we have now just recently found out that Joe Biden has selected Kamala Harris to become his vice presidential appointee, assuming that he were to win. But let's talk a little bit, or have you speak a little bit about what's at stake in this upcoming election. What are some of the things that you already see going on in terms of voter suppression? The conversations surrounding, mail-in votes are going to be fraudulent. And what must be done? Because I think our laissez-faire attitude, perhaps in 2016, in terms of not turning up at the polls, well, Barack's not running. He's no longer the president, so maybe I will come, maybe I won't come. And then we ended up where we've ended up. So let's unpack that a little bit and talk about the upcoming election, what the Urban League is doing there, what we need to do, the awareness that our audience needs to hear about the importance of it.
So let me first speak on a personal level, not as president of the National Urban League, but give a personal point of view on Vice President Biden's selection of Kamala Harris, which I think is a brilliant selection. And I think it strengthens his hand and strengthens that ticket in significant ways. Kamala Harris has been on my radar screen now for 16, 17 years. We honored her. The first time we did the Women of Power Awards at the National Urban League Conference in 2004, and she was the newly elected district attorney of San Francisco. And one of my trustees, Chuck Collins, brought her to our attention and she said, she is going to be something big. Let's honor her now. I said, wow, good. And she came, and it was very spectacular. She was impressive then, as she is now. I think with the diversity in the country, I think the days of an all-white ticket are over. I think the days of an all-white male ticket are over. I think that the public demands, particularly on the side of the Democratic coalition, a leadership team that looks like the followers, that feels like the followers, that has the sensibility and the life experiences of the followers and the masses. And in picking her, she picked someone who's a United States senator who sought the presidency. I think she's capable of becoming president should she have to on short notice. I think he also picked somebody who's a seasoned, tough campaigner. And that's a plus indeed for her. And I think the third thing is he picked someone who's uniquely a part of Black America. She's an AKA. She's a member of the Howard University community and a Howard grad. You know, for Black America, that says something. That means something. It's a connection point for many, and I feel very, very. I'm excited for her, and I think should she prevail, should the ticket prevail, I think she's going to be an impact player and do a very good job. I'll offer these thoughts because you asked about 2016, and look, right, what we've had in this country. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down an important provision of the Voting Rights Act, Butch. What that did is it opened the gates. And through the gates, the alligators, crocodiles, cobras, and rattlesnakes came through the gate. The alligator of voter ID, the crocodile of voter purging, the cobra of let's eliminate or cut back on early voting, right? The rattlesnake of discrediting the vote by mail system and the post office, which is completely outrageous. And so that was enabled by a decision of the Supreme Court in 2013 called Shelby, which I believe is a decision that will be recognized in history as being as bad as Plessy in 1896 and as bad as Dred Scott in 1857. And that has, to a great extent, done so much damage and damaged the voting system. So we have to be resolute. We have to be vigilant. We have to be determined. We have to fight back. We have to fight back politically. We have to fight back through the courts. We have to fight back with our brains. We must vote. what does that mean? We must double check our voter registration. We must double check where our polling place is. We must be clear on how we can vote in our state. Do you need an ID? If you vote by mail, do you need 2 witnesses and a notary? We've got to educate ourselves in a way that perhaps we haven't taken for granted. And then we've got to realize that in 2016, the voter suppression effort also included foreign actors like the Russians, who ran an internet-based campaign on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, masking themselves as Black activists and saying, particularly to our young people, don't vote. It's a waste of time. And I just think anybody within earshot, caveat emptor, beware of some of what comes on the internet. All of it is not legitimate. All of it is not true. There are many people who are phonies parading as legitimate spokespersons and activists on the internet. And you got to be woke and aware and vigilant.
No question. Well, let me pivot to, you've been very generous with your time, but I want to talk about and have you talk about, more importantly, something that you're going to be announcing soon, which is a tremendous accomplishment for the Urban League, very important for our country, very important for New York City, for where I am and where the Urban League started. But would love for you to talk about the Urban League Empowerment Center, what that's going to comprise about, what the vision of this was 8 years ago, and what it's what it's turned out to be, and what you hope to be, which will be a lasting legacy, Marc, for what you have done with the Urban League over what will now 17 years, but by the time this is done will be 20 years, and what you hope to have this grow into over time.
Well, hey, thank you for asking. Yeah, it's been, I'm gonna exhale a little bit because it's been one tough project, and lots of teamwork got us to where we are. But here's what it is. So the National Urban League and our developer partners, we're going to build a 17-story building in Central Harlem on 125th Street between Adam Clayton Powell and Malcolm X Boulevards, 2 doors over roughly from the Adam Clayton Powell office building. That 17-story building will house retail space for major retailers and community retailers. It will house the National Urban League's headquarters. It will house New York's first ever civil rights museum, the Urban Civil Rights Museum Experience. It'll house a new institute, the National Urban League Institute for Race, Equity, and Justice, which is if you will, going to also be a physical space where communities and community organizations and community leaders can convene meetings and host activities. Then there'll be, in addition to that, 170 units of affordable housing. This is not a gentrification project. This is an anti-gentrification project. And so what it is the National Urban League is going home. We're going back to where we were started in the early 1900s. We're going back to one of America's most historic and significant neighborhoods, and perhaps Black America's most historic and significant neighborhood, and it is Harlem. I call it Harlem, USA. And we're making a statement about ownership. We're making a statement about Black participation. Black lawyer Charles Hamilton, lead developer BRP, a Black developer Meredith Marshall, our other partners on our team, our owner's representative, a Black woman by the name of Dewana Williams, who has her own company. Over at Goldman Sachs, a Black partner by the name of Margaret Anadu is leading our efforts. So what I'm really proud of is that, and of course when we build, there will be African-American contractors participating in the project. Our own architect, Lou Schweitzer, African-American owned firm. So we've maximized thus far African American participation, Black participation in the project, because we want to practice what we preach. We preach, we encourage, we demand, we advocate, we insist that others include our businesses. And we wanted to do the very same thing. We wanted to do it to the maximum extent feasible. So this is going to be a project for all of Harlem. It's going to be for the National Urban League and the Urban League movement, which spans 36 states and 90 cities and millions of people. And it's going to be a statement for New York because of this Civil Rights Museum and the Institute. So we've got some more work to do. We hope to break ground shortly. We are still have to complete our capital campaign. We've got the museum plan we're working on. We're going to be working to build a board that's interested in that sort of work. So this is really going to be a significant project for Harlem and for New York and for the United States. Let me tell you what inspired it. Maybe 15 years ago, a little over, when I got to the Urban League, I kind of queried why we were located on Wall Street. And then some of the old timers who worked at the Urban League, I shouldn't say the old timers, some of the veterans, said, we used to own this building. I said, I heard about the building. He said, yeah, we own this building. And before that, we owned another building. And circumstances and deterioration of the building meant that they made a decision to sell the building and create an endowment with some of the proceeds. But it always struck me that we should be uptown. It just struck me that we should be in Harlem. It struck me that we should also not simply be content to operate in leased space if we could avoid it. And so the first thing we did is we moved from leased space in Washington, where we have a policy office or a Washington bureau. We moved from leased space to where we own a condominium, an office condominium in the building of the United Negro College Fund. And so this was really about making a statement about practicing what we preached, and also putting us in a position where we never pay rent again. And with the successful completion of our capital campaign, we never pay a mortgage again, and others will pay us some rent.
That's very exciting, Mark. Very, very exciting.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you and your. Listen, I want to thank you for spending the time.
Thanks for having me today, Butch.
This has been a great fireside chat. Let us make sure that we join together to change the face of power in this country for African Americans, change the face of what wealth building looks like, and make sure that we're getting our fair share of what we should be getting, and that opportunities for our kids and grandchildren continue to be plentiful, and that they don't have to see and endure, frankly, what both your father and my father, and unfortunately we had to now endure, but that we will make it that much better. So, Mark, thank you.
And thank you, Butch. And I want to, pay tribute to your wonderful father, who was just a lion and a champion and a role model. I know for you, but also for me and for everyone. Right? He was an incredible guy, and like my father, these guys just had an insistence and a no nonsense approach to justice and what was right. And it always when I reflect on that, I say, and they were living in times far more difficult than ours.
Oh, no doubt. My father used to say all the time, he said, you got to be willing to walk in harm's way. And he said, and the problem with the new generation and the younger generation is they don't even begin to understand what the struggle's like.
Gotta walk in harm's way. That's powerful.
Be willing to walk in harm's way. If you're willing to walk in harm's way, then you're a person who can connect with. So I've never, I've always kept that in my head. And frankly, I think that's what the people who got to support the Urban League got to be the same thing. They got to be willing to walk in harm's way.
No question. Yeah.
Anyway, Mark,
hey, thank you. We'll be in touch. God bless you.
God bless you.
Stay safe and healthy.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks.